Hello, and welcome back for a continued discussion on organ transplantation for the treatment of human disease for scientific ethics. This week, we're going to look a little bit more into kind of procuring and making human organs available for transplant, and then talk about some of the exciting kind of new developments that are being looked at as a way to treat human diseases and organ failure and organ kind of dysregulation and kind of disruption of the organ's function with some new technology associated with stem cells. But for today, we're going to start out with taking a look at the distribution of human organs for transplant. So one of the themes we've talked about throughout the course is this concept of justice. And so when we're talking about making available these very scarce, very valuable organs for transplantation, we want to make sure that we've got a system that's going to provide fair and either equal or equitable, depending on which approach we're taking, but relatively fair and equal access to the process for determining who gets these organs. Now, the problem comes out when we start to try to figure out what is fair and equal. And so to give it a little bit of a definition, kind of equal access would ideally be fair and unbiased. But we could also take a look, again, using some of the ethical philosophies that we've talked about earlier in the course. We could take a look at who needs the organ more. What's the maximum benefit? Kind of think about that maximum good that could be involved with providing a very scarce, very valuable organ to somebody who's at risk of dying. And again, trying to determine, if you have to make the decision, almost playing God, who is going to get the organ and who is going to, survive and live longer, and who's going to remain on the wait list. Keeping in mind that with these scarce organs, if you're on the wait list, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a match for an organ in the future. And because of that, you could end up dying on the wait list without getting access to the organ that you need. So a couple different systems have been proposed to, provide, at least some type of, somewhat objective criteria to the process of applying or making available these organs. But if we take a look at it, most of the systems talk about merit-based, some reason, some objective criteria in which we, try to figure out who is the important I don't want to say important, who is the person that needs the organ the most. And again, determining who needs the organ most depends on, how much and how, we're defining the need. And so again, most of these merit-based systems, regardless of whatever criteria we put in place, even though we're trying to make objective criteria, the criteria that we select in the process of selecting those criteria is going to be somewhat subjective. And because it's subjective, they're going to be related to, some potential bias based on the system that we're building for this. And so many times we can take a look at it. Is it according to effort that people are putting into society, according to contribution, how they're contributing, the value they have to society, the value they have to their family. And again, that becomes very, very difficult. Do you, give an organ to, a provider for their family, somebody that has, lots of kids and they need the family income? Or, do you give it to kind of a single older individual that, is running a business and in running the business, providing a livelihood for, all the people that are around them, but they don't have a direct family. They don't have an immediate family that's associated with, what we talked about with the father that's trying to provide for their family. We can even extend that further to say, what about free market exchanges and, the controversy associated with that? We make these organs available to, whoever can pay for it. And, should there be kind of a payment in exchange for this? Is the payment solely considered to be a monetary payment, or could it be, like a service in kind where, similar to some of the tuition remission programs where, you work in underserved neighborhoods, you can get part of your student loans paid off, depending upon the type of degree you have and the type of, qualifications that you have. So the idea is that we want to try to provide equal access to organs using kind of an unbiased and objective criteria. And so, one way to take a look at this is the length of time on the waiting list. So it's almost like a deli model. You go in, you pick up a number, and when your number comes up, you get served. And so, if you get there early, you're, more likely to, get to the front of the line than somebody that's getting there later. Now, the problem with the length of time waiting is that, we take a look at the people. In order to be put on a wait list for an organ, they have to have, pretty significant damage to their organ. Their organ, in many cases, won't be functioning. And because of that, the people that have been waiting longer are often going to be sicker. Their bodies are starting to break down, kind of related to the breakdown of the organ that we're looking at transplanting. And so people that have been on the waiting list longer, they're going to be sicker, and therefore they may have kind of less likely to survive the surgery, or less likely to have kind of a long period of life after that, good quality of life after that. And so basically what we're looking at is, if you do the first come first serve, you may end up giving the organ to somebody that's been on the waiting list a long time, but because they're very, very sick, they may end up dying sooner than somebody that has just gone on the waiting list and is relatively healthy and strong, and is able to receive the organ and have a good quality of life afterwards. So that's again somewhat objective criteria. It's not based on science and not based on medicine. It's just basically looked at who was able to get their name on the list first. Another way of providing equal access using, again, objective, unbiased criteria is that, you make it so that the youngest person on the waiting list gets the organ. And so if you're doing that, the idea is that the younger tend to be stronger, tend to be healthier, probably haven't had as advanced a disease process. And therefore, they're likely to survive the surgery and have a very good outcome after the transplant has occurred. But again, if you do it that way, you're really biased against older, elderly people that, and they have to decide who gets these organs, what criteria is it that we're going to be using, who is it that, whatever we're doing within this system is going to be biased against. We're going to have a system that, is not going to have everybody at the front of the line. Somebody's going to have to go to the back. And we have to have a system that we can justify and explain, because there are going to be people that are unhappy. There are going to be people that die in the absence of getting their organ that they need. And so again, we're taking a look at this. We're talking about trying to come up with an unbiased consideration. But any system we put in place is going to have an inherent bias within it. So, we could take a look at it. Is there a medical bias? What if the lifestyle contributed to the damage of the organ? So you've got a patient in liver failure, and, they've got cirrhosis of the liver, they've got the yellowing kind of the skin, they're not pulling the toxins out of their body the way that they would if the liver was functioning. And so they're starting to get sicker. They're going downhill, if we want to take a look at it in a very prerogative sense. But basically what happens if this is a person that is an alcoholic, has been drinking excessively throughout their life, should they be in the line to get an organ, to get a replacement liver for the liver that they damaged? What about, if we take a look at an emergency medical service provider? We look at a paramedic that is going into treating patients, picking them up, out of the hospital setting, and it gets exposed to hepatitis C. That hepatitis C is a viral disease, an infectious disease that, when caught, causes a lot of severe damage to the liver. So if we take a look at this, we have one person who's an alcoholic and potentially kind of destroyed his liver. But I got another individual, a paramedic, that's going out, doing his job, or her job. I know a lot of female paramedics. So they're doing their job. They're exposed to a pathogen, a disease-causing virus, in this case, hepatitis C, and they end up with liver damage. In that situation, you know, would you have a bias towards one individual to the other simply because of how they got the disease, how their organ kind of became damaged? So that's an example of medical bias and maybe a little bit of societal bias kind of thrown in. We can also have social or societal bias. So if we're taking a look at it, where do we put prisoners on a waiting list? You've got an individual that has committed a crime against society, has been judged by a jury of their peers, but now they're, you know, in a prison setting, they're getting sick. But where do you put them on the waiting list? Does it matter if the prisoner did a white-collar crime and, you know, stole from a bank or an investment firm, or if it's a violent crime? You know, they went through and they robbed, you know, liquor stores with a gun, you know, potentially injuring somebody in the process. We let those factors kind of influence our decision. You know, do we put prisoners on the list at all? Or, you know, do they become almost like second-class citizens? And they, you know, they get an organ, you know, if something's available after everybody on the front of the list gets it. You know, look at these things. We try to come up with objective criteria, but the sole action of finding the criteria is going to result in some type of subjective bias, some type of inherent bias against individuals simply because of the system that we're putting in place. You know, we can take a look at this, and again, looking at some of those ethical frameworks that we talked about before, you know, considering the maximum benefit of the transplant, you know, examining the long-term effects of the organ transplants. And so we can take a look at it. The maximum benefit would be based on medical need, you know, giving it to the sickest people, giving it to the individuals that have been on the wait list the longest, that have the most severe degeneration, degradation, kind of breakdown of their organs. And so they're sickest, and so they should get the organ because they've got the most kind of range of improvement to go from sick to well. And that's one way to think about it. Or, you know, do we give the transplant, give the organ to somebody based on the likelihood of success of the transplant? You know, do you give the organ to somebody that is relatively healthy, relatively strong, they're going to survive the surgery, and have a long period of productive life after that? Now, again, you know, looking at that, you know, biased against the older people that, you know, maybe, you know, getting towards the end of their lifespan. Again, two very good systems in which we can determine who gets the transplant, medical need versus success of transplant. But if we put this in, it's inherently biased against one group or the other group. Okay, so when we're taking a look at this, again, similar to, you know, trying to figure out what's the maximum good that we're going to be doing in an action, what are the criteria for the maximum benefit? You know, what's considered a successful outcome? Is it going to be years of survival after the transplant? Is it going to be quality of life? Both of these, you know, length of survival, as we talked about, you know, in today's lecture, is a bias against older individual. You know, if you do a transplant of somebody in, you know, in their 20s versus considering a transplant of somebody in their 60s, you know, the person in their 60s, you know, maybe they only have 20 or 25 years of life expectancy left. And many of those years are going to be in the, you know, kind of aging decline, as opposed to somebody in their 20s where you get 50 or 60 years of survival out of them. You know, again, there's no good answer for this, and any system we put in place makes it challenging, makes it difficult to try to figure out, you know, what is the system that we have? What is it that we need to be doing? And so in an effort to try to kind of minimize these inherent biases built in with the system, what we've got within the United States is individual systems associated with the Association of Organ Procurement Organizations. So that each organ procurement center, each regional center, as we're going to see on the next slide, are going to have their own criteria. And again, they have to define what that criteria is and follow their criteria. in an effort to have an ethical system for providing the organs to the individuals within their region. So if we take a look at it within the United States, what we can see is basically 11 different organ sharing systems within the United States, regionally located. But the overall network doesn't mandate criteria. It basically helps in kind of organizing, it helps in the matching, but it doesn't determine who it is that is actually decided to get the organ. And again, many of the criteria based on these regional organ donation networks is based on medical need, based on probability of success, based on time on the waiting list. But again, if we take a look at this, we have to determine if we're applying these criteria, is it biased and is it subjective? So again, hammering this point, what do the criteria mean? What is the definition of success? What is the definition of need? And in many cases, we're not going to look at this solely on the basis of one criteria. So we're going to have to look at kind of the whole patient. We're going to have to take a look at the whole medical record and get an idea about what's going on with these individuals. And if we're doing this, how should the criteria be weighted? Should there be, some criteria that's more important? Again, keeping in mind that regardless of the criteria we put in place, regardless of the system we have in place, we have limited organs. And with these limited organs, we're always going to have a system that is biased against some individuals, that some individuals are going to get very, very sick, and they're going to end up going on the wait list. They're going to be hopeful that they're going to receive an organ. But as we saw in the information last week, people die every day waiting on the wait list because there aren't enough organs, and there aren't enough organs to match up with the individuals that need it. And so what we're seeing then is that as long as the supply of available organs is limited, any system we have in place is going to be imperfect. And so the ideal way to deal with this is to try to come up with a way in which we can increase the supply of the organs. If you're taking a look at a company, if the company had a limited product that there was a lot of demand for, they would figure out a way to produce more of whatever that product was. Now, it's going to be very hard for us to go through and increase the number of human organs that are available. We can't put in a factory, we can't put in a production line, but there must be some way in which we can increase the supply. And we talked about this a little bit last week when we talked about the difference between the opt-in versus the opt-out donor registry system. And so that has the potential. But again, that's going to be limited. Even the countries that have an opt-out registration, donor registration system, they still have kind of a limited supply of the organs. And so what we want to do then is to try to figure out a way in which, while we're building up our supply of organs, while we're making it more likely that these organs are going to become available for transplantation, we've got to come up with a system where we can make these decisions as to who gets and doesn't get an organ is going to be as fair as possible. Again, because if we have more organs available, people aren't dying while they're waiting for an organ, it's not as much of a concern what type of system we have for determining who gets it. But as long as they remain a limited supply, we've got to come up with a way to figure this out. And so one way in which we can think about trying to increase the availability of organs, and again, a very, very controversial way, is the use of incentives. And we're going to take a look at that in the second half of the lecture today. So as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you and have a great day.